All right, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard a recording of your own voice and just cringed? Or, you see a photo of yourself and think, wait, is that really what I look like? We're going to dive into that feeling because, it's not just some random awkwardness. It's actually a huge clue about how your brain builds your entire reality. And this thing we call the ego, yeah, it's sitting right at the heart of the whole operation. I mean, it's a totally universal experience, right? That person on the recording, it sounds like a stranger, an imposter, even though you know it's you. Well, that jarring mismatch, that gap between how you feel you are on the inside and what you see or hear on the outside, that's the exact mystery we're going to unravel today. And trust me, the answer goes way, way deeper than just simple acoustics. And look, that weird feeling about your voice, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The exact same sense of alienation, of things just not feeling right, it pops up all over the place. Like when a social role you're playing feels totally hollow, or when you feel like you're wearing a mask that's just false. Even when a simple phone call can feel weirdly hostile for no reason. All of these things are clues. They're all pointing to the same hidden machinery in our minds, this constant invisible process of translation. And, as we'll see, a process of loss. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we need a bit of a framework, a formal model. We're going to look at how your brain actually takes in the world, and more importantly, what it has to give up just to make any sense of it all. This is where we get into the really good stuff. Two key concepts called projection and something called the ego buffer. So, let's start with your inner world. I want you to just imagine your lived experience for a second. It's everything, right? It's not just what you're seeing and hearing, it's your memories, your gut feelings, every subtle emotion, all of it happening at once, all the time. It's incredibly rich and complex. The technical term for this is a high-dimensional space, but honestly, a much better way to picture it is just a fire hose of raw, unfiltered data. That's you. Okay, so you've got this fire hose of experience inside you, but here's the problem. You can't just hand that fire hose to someone else. To communicate anything or to even just observe yourself in a mirror, you have to represent it somehow. You got to take that immense inner world and squeeze it into words or a photo or a specific social role. And every time you do that, that's what we're calling a projection. It's the act of flattening your rich, high-dimensional reality into a much, much simpler, low-dimensional format. And here is the absolute key to everything. During this projection, this flattening process, information is always lost. It's unavoidable. Think about it. When you cast a shadow of a 3D cube onto a 2D wall, you lose all the information about its depth, right? You can't rebuild the original cube from just its shadow. It's the same thing here. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. When you project your inner self, information is just gone forever. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's a fundamental law of the process. So if we're constantly losing all this information, why doesn't our sense of self feel like I don't know, a glitchy, fragmented video feed? Well, this is where the ego comes in. And I need you to forget the pop psychology definition for a second. In this model, the ego is not your identity. It's not you. It's a function. It's like a software patch, an error correction layer. Its job is to spot the gaps left behind by that information loss and just smooth them over. It fills in the blanks with a plausible story, a narrative fill, all to keep your sense of you feeling coherent and stable. And this sets up a fundamental choice your brain is constantly making, every single second. It's a trade-off. On one side, you have fidelity. That means feeling the full, jarring, uncomfortable reality of all that lost information. On the other side, you have stability. That means letting the ego do its job, buffering the loss, and keeping the story of you running smoothly. And this isn't a choice you're consciously making. It's happening way down in the operating system. All right, so this is where things get really, really interesting. You might be thinking, okay, this is a cool psychological model, right? It's about brains and feelings. But what if I told you that this exact same pattern, projection, information loss, and stabilization, shows up at the most fundamental level of reality itself, at the level of quantum physics? Yeah, no, seriously. We're not talking about some vague, mystical connection here. This is about a direct, one-to-one structural parallel. The way our minds process reality follows the same rules as physics. It turns out that the problem of looking in a mirror is, in a very deep and real way, the same fundamental problem as trying to measure a quantum particle. So check this out. This is where it all clicks into place. This table lays it out perfectly, showing the same pattern at 3 totally different scales. So let's walk through it. At the quantum level, you've got a high-dimensional reality called Hilbert space that gets projected through an active measurement. And what gets lost? Phase information. Now look at perception. Our own high-dimensional inner world gets projected through a mirror or our recorded voice. What gets lost? Context. And finally, identity. Our complex internal self-model gets projected into a social role. What gets lost? Nuance. You see the pattern? High-dimensional space, an active projection, and irreversible information loss. It's the same structure, again and again. So, what's the point of all this? Why does any of this matter? Well, because this model gives us a completely new and, I think, much more compassionate lens for understanding human differences, specifically for thinking about neurodivergence. It lets us shift the entire conversation away from words like disorder or pathology, away from the idea that something is broken, and instead talk about different brain architectures, different tunings.
Yeah, this idea right here sums it up perfectly. Not broken buffering, reduced buffering. Think about that. What if some people's brains aren't broken at all? What if they're just tuned differently? What if they're built with a weaker ego buffer, a system that by design prioritizes raw, high-fidelity reality over a clean, stable story?
So when we look at things like ASD or ADHD through this lens, it changes everything. Maybe what's going on is a combination of things. A more complex, higher dimensional internal reality paired with a weaker narrative compression engine. This would naturally lead to a much greater and often more painful sensitivity to all that information being lost during projection. It's like they can literally see the compression artifacts of reality, the glitches and gaps that most people's ego buffers just automatically smooth over and pretend aren't there.
And this explains so much about why social situations can be incredibly draining, even painful for some people. I mean, think about what most social interaction is. It's often ultra-low dimensional, it's high speed, and it's super heavy on simple narratives. It basically demands an aggressive, powerful ego buffer to keep up. But for a brain that's tuned for fidelity, that whole game feels false. It feels hollow and just deeply wrong. The social mask doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it doesn't fit because you are acutely aware of exactly how much of your real self it's cutting out.
So this brings us full circle, right back to that central trade-off. We've looked at the theory, we've seen the wild parallel in quantum physics, and we've talked about what it means for how we see each other. But now, let's bring it back home, back to you. Because every single one of us lives somewhere on this spectrum, this constant balancing act between fidelity and stability. You can kind of think of it as two different modes of being. On one side, you have the high buffer attractor. This person has a very coherent, strong self-story. The upside is stability. But the risk? Well, the failure mode is developing blind spots, becoming rigid in your identity. Then, on the other side, you have the low buffer attractor. This person experiences reality with incredible fidelity. They're acutely aware of every mismatch, every bit of nuance. The huge benefit there is authenticity. But the risk is feeling fragmented, getting overloaded, and struggling with anxiety. And what's really crucial to understand is that your spot on this spectrum is not set in stone. It's not fixed for life. Big life events can totally change where you land. Trauma, for example, can just shatter the buffer, forcing you to confront that raw, unfiltered reality. A moment of deep insight or a psychedelic experience can suddenly increase the complexity of your inner world so much that the old, simple stories just don't work anymore. And even something like burnout can just drain the energy you need to keep that narrative running. So it really all boils down to this one powerful idea, which the source material puts so perfectly. Let me just read it. Ego is a narrative error correction layer that stabilizes identity by replacing information destroyed during low-dimensional projection of high-dimensional experience. In the end, the ego isn't you. It's a function. It's a tool your brain uses to build a stable sense of you out of all the broken, fragmented reflections it finds in the world.
So the next time you hear your voice on a recording and you get that little cringe, maybe don't just brush it off. Pause for a second. Ask yourself what that feeling is really telling you. Because it's a signal, right? It's a message from the deepest part of your own cognitive architecture. And it leaves us with one last big question to think about. In this constant, silent negotiation your brain is making between fidelity to the truth and the stability of a good story, which one are you optimizing for?